One of the most important questions in the Robert Mueller investigation into Trump Russia is, are they going to talk to Donald Trump, right? We know that Robert Mueller's team wants to speak to Trump. We saw a list of nearly 50 questions that would be possible questions for that meeting or that exchange. And at this point, the major question that I have is there going to be an in-person sit-down between Robert Mueller or his investigators and the President of the United States? Are they going to agree to a sort of interview in writing where Trump's lawyers will get to write down Donald Trump's answers to questions? And if the desire is for an in-person meeting, is Trump going to agree to that meeting, or is Robert Mueller going to have to subpoena Donald Trump? And if so, is he willing to issue that subpoena? If there is a subpoena, will there be a debate as to the strength and power of a subpoena of the sitting president of the United States? We don't have answers to a lot of these questions yet. But what we did learn in the last 12 hours is that when Robert Mueller met with Donald Trump's lawyers in March, just weeks ago, the meeting was very tense because there were actually disagreements about Robert Mueller's subpoena power, and Robert Mueller did threaten a subpoena. And this is very, very quickly escalating. We know, based on a very good Washington Post report by Carol Loenig and Robert Costa, and Costa has been doing really good reporting for the last year on this. First of all, during this meeting in March 2017, Trump's lawyers insisted Trump has no obligation to speak to Mueller, period. Basically saying, listen, if we do anything, it's because we're going to choose to do it, not because we have to do it. And Mueller, during this same meeting, made it clear, actually, that's not true. I could subpoena the president of the United States and force him to testify before a grand jury. 4 people familiar with the situation spoke to the Washington Post about this. And this is major for a number of different reasons. Number one is that up until now, we know that the opinion of Trump's lawyers has been that they don't want Trump to talk to Mueller, but now we know that they also think Trump doesn't have to talk to Mueller, which is a very, very different set of beliefs if you are Donald Trump's legal team. This report from the Washington Post is also huge because even though we all knew that subpoenas are possible from Robert Mueller, right, in a sort of general sense, we didn't know whether or not Mueller had actually mentioned that possibility of a subpoena to Donald Trump's team. And indeed, according to this report, he did. Trump's now resigned lawyer from back in March of 2017, John Dowd, reportedly was not at all happy with Mueller when Mueller mentioned this, saying, this isn't some kind of game. You are screwing with the work of the President of the United States. We now know that this meeting not going well was the catalyst for Mueller's team sending over information to the Trump legal team that became the list of nearly 50 questions that we talked about yesterday, and Trump seemingly not reacting well at all to this, tweeting again about a witch hunt, weird capitalization throughout this entire thing this morning, saying there was no collusion, it is a hoax capitalized, of course, and there is no obstruction of justice. That is a setup and trap. What there is negotiations going on with North Korea over nuclear war, negotiations going on with China over trade deficits, negotiations on NAFTA, and much more. Witch hunt, and because the subpoena news is so big, it's actually gotten lost in all of this, that this Washington Post piece also confirms that the leak Trump was mad about yesterday, Trump said that yesterday it was disgraceful that these questions leaked. The leak is it's coming from inside the House, quite literally the White House. Either Trump or his team leaked the questions because we now know that list of 49 questions was not a list provided by Robert Mueller. That was a list of questions compiled or created by Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, as possible questions, meaning that since it's Trump's lawyer's list, someone in Trump's staff leaked the list. And I think that that's actually part of the plan, right? The idea here of leaking these questions is to make it appear as though Robert Mueller is getting a little too broad in his reach, that Mueller's going too far, and that it all just lacks legitimacy. Because once the questions are public, you can say, look at all the stuff Mueller's going into, and also the fact that the questions themselves are public delegitimizes the sort of privacy of the entire organization. This was no doubt a calculated leak from the Trump White House. And if it wasn't, Trump's got a major problem if someone within his team is choosing to leak these questions. So I believe that there is no question that to have a truly full and fair hearing of what Donald Trump knew or is willing to admit knowing, Mueller's going to need a subpoena. I don't know if we will get that subpoena, but this written set of questions that Mueller could send over to Trump to then have his lawyers answer, that's not going to clear anything up, okay? And hopefully we will get that subpoena soon. And there are people who will say, David, isn't it disruptive to government, to the office of the presidency, to subpoena the president of the United States? Shouldn't we consider that? This is too important to accept anything but the fullest possible answers to what it is that Trump did and what it is that Trump knew. And the way to get that at this point is going to happen one of ways, which is skilled investigators talking to Donald Trump in a live setting. If you don't believe that the subpoena is necessary to get to the truth, let me know. I'm on Twitter at @Pakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Today's episode of the program is made possible in part by CoinSchedule, a listing site for initial coin offerings that's been around since 2016. It was actually one of the first websites to show listing information about ICOs. You can look them up by name, type of industry, the ICO's end date, the start date, and it also gives each ICO a score using an algorithm based on dozens of parameters to help you determine how trustworthy an ICO is. Very important to be able to filter out scams. So for example, whether or not the identities of the ICO team are verified is listed by CoinSchedule. Whether the ICO has a white paper, these types of parameters. And CoinSchedule also doesn't try to make predictions about the long-term success or failure of any ICO project, since this is often impossible. What they do instead is provide users with a combined score of how much operational risk CoinSchedule sees for each different ICO, so that you can know when you've got to be careful with ICOs that have a low rating. If you're watching this on YouTube, I've put a link to the CoinSchedule website at the top of the video description. And of course, nothing in CoinSchedule should be considered personalized investment advice. ICOs are risky. People should do their own research and make their own decisions.